Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Thy Strong Word. I'm Pastor AJ Espinosa. We're reading the entire Bible together, book by book, chapter by chapter, and I'm so excited. We are just, every chapter is just so cool. We're going through the book of Revelation. We've seen so many things throughout this past year, from the Gospel of John through his letters, looked at the apocalyptic literature in Daniel and in Zechariah. And so here we are, and we're really getting to soak this stuff up now. And today is just another one of these really cool days where you're really glad that we've read stuff like Zechariah, where you had, that's right, different colored horses, right? So some of these similar sorts of images. Of course, there's the talk of the beasts still, right? All this stuff that seems to be coming back from Daniel and Zechariah here again. But the thing that's new, it's interesting here in this chapter 6 of Revelation, you got this sequence of 7 seals, and so we've been seeing the number 7 over and over again, but here it's a sequence, one after the next, right? And this is one where, people really can go along with this stuff, right? In terms of, the full moon becomes like blood, and what does that represent? And what's this going to happen? Are these all future events, or are these all things that have already happened? So a lot of important questions in the midst of things that maybe even seem a little bit familiar, new applications. And joining us today, we got Pastor Nate Ruback. He's pastor at Grace Lutheran Chapel in St. Louis, Missouri. Good morning, brother. Good to have you back with us.
Thank you for having me. Yep, great morning today. The sun is shining outside. It is a beautiful day to be in God's Word, that is for sure.
Amen. Amen. And so we're looking here at Revelation chapter 6, and, so we're several chapters in. We've been kind of, getting our heads wrapped around this, what kind of genre this is, what that means. But, Revelation 6 here, I feel like this is one of these chapters that people are maybe more familiar with when they read Revelation. Like, people think about the different colored horses and the riders and the 7 seals. It just seems like something where there have been so many people who have gone in so many different directions with this stuff, right? I am a big lover of art, photography, and all this. And what constantly comes to my mind when we hear the words in Revelation 6 is this picture of the Four Horsemen. We've seen it depicted in artwork. We've seen it come out in movies, in culture, that you come across somebody and you tell them, or what do you hear about the Four Horsemen? It automatically seems to conjure up an image that people begin to be familiar. The difficult part is what people are familiar with aren't always what is being revealed or understood of what's actually happening within these words of Revelation 6. But that vision or that picture of the Four Horsemen is kind of a stark picture of what's to come. I'll never forget. I haven't actually seen this, but I saw it in my mind's eye here. I had a professor back in seminary who was like, when you think about it, it really is pretty striking that we decorate children's rooms with like Noah's Ark and give them like Ark mobiles.
Oh, sure.
An event of mass destruction and death and judgment. You don't see anyone who gives their kids a mobile of like the Four Horsemen of the apocalypse, and just
or
that image
that carries
of like the Four Horsemen like spinning around like a toddler crib or something just hasn't left me. So, but these visuals, right?
Sure.
So yeah. What do you make of it though, right? There are just so many images, and these images are powerful because they do stick with you. But to what end, right? So that'll be the focus of today. So we want to make sure we, it's only going to be like 17 verses. It's not the longest chapter in Revelation by any stretch, but this is one of these denser ones, certainly.
Yeah, I think there's so much that's caught up in the imagery, in the vibrant imagery of what's described, that although it's only 17 verses, we could spend weeks just on one of the horses, one of the images that happens within those, really the 6 seals that are opened for us in chapter 6.
Right.
Every one of them is just very rich in what it's trying to show. And I think the difficulty is whenever you read any portion of Revelation, especially this chapter, there's so many interpretations. and there's so many the different directions from angles of different church bodies and different faith traditions that lend a different meaning to what's being depicted.
Right. Yeah. No. There really, really are, and I think that sometimes the other, I think in the midst of that, especially with our 21st century sensibilities, it's really easy then to say like, oh well, kind of everybody has their own interpretation. It's kind of whatever you think, or sometimes we'll put it in like pious terms, like however the Spirit leads you, or something like that, right? And then sometimes we kind of just give up and we say like, well, how can anyone really be sure what any of this stuff means, right?
Sure. So we simply fall into the sake of, well, since I cannot fully understand it, then anybody can bring their own, meaning and interpretation into it. I did a quick Google search on meaning of Revelation 6, and it is amazing. I mean, you get hundreds of different angles and views, and some that are very literal into this is exactly what's going to happen, into, well, we don't really know, but it might be. The cross-the-board understandings of the vision that's happening, doesn't, until we really look at to understanding who God is through those Old Testament apocalyptic writings and prophetic writings, we don't begin, you really step back and see who the focus is, who's doing the work, where this is all coming from. You read anything without any understanding or previous context, you can put any interpretation on it that you want.
Yeah, that's right. Right. Yeah, and I think that's really well said, because if you do just take it out of context, right, it can feel that way. But when you put these things in context, I feel like there really aren't that many degrees of freedom, actually. When you put it in the context, there's really not actually that many ways you really can make it fit. Which is actually very, very helpful. And, as you were just saying, focusing on Christ and focusing, especially in the depiction in chapter 5, right, that it's a depiction of him as victorious, right? Mm-hmm. Him as having conquered, him as having the right to open the seals, right? Like when you put it in that context, it really narrows the possible range of meanings. And so I think we are going to see that it's not as hopeless of a cause here to try to make firm sense of things. So, but without any further ado, let's go ahead and turn to the text. As we do so, would you say a prayer for us and for everyone listening along today?
Absolutely. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. It is a great and glorious day to live in the grace and forgiveness that you give to us every day. We thank you for the opportunity to be in your word. We pray that you would give us a measure of your Spirit, that we can see what you are teaching and leading us, ultimately pointing us back to your Son Jesus, who has died and has risen and lives victorious, so that we would have forgiveness in life. Bless us in this time. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right, let's just read the first verse and kind of we can then pause then and kind of remember, okay, now hang on, like how does this link up with things? So here's the first verse of Revelation chapter 6. Now I watched when the Lamb opened one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures say with a voice like thunder, "Come." All right, so before we get to what he sees then, right, okay, so here's the Lamb actually on the verge of opening the 7 seals. One of the 4 living creatures is announcing this. Okay, so these are all figures that have been introduced so far. How is this fitting in with chapter 5 and the rest of it?
So I think the way, and purposefully the way that 6 starts out, is obviously identifying who has the authority to be opening up the scrolls. We see that it isn't John, it is the Lamb. It is in Christ's authority that these things are being revealed, which then leads us to under whose authority certain punishments and things that come, whose authority they're coming from. I think it's important to know. Well, the importance is always found in the details, whether it's one word or 5 verses. And to identify that it's physically the Lamb, that it is Jesus Christ who has the authority to open these seals, sets out the pretense of whose authority, in which perspective this is. Everything that will be revealed in the following verses comes from. So I think that's the first point we can kind of take away from verse 1. I think the other point is when we hear the voice of the four living creatures, we often see those as angels that have a specific task. There's always that God often, not always, uses angels to be able to be a messenger or a person to purvey a divine message from God, sometimes good, sometimes bad. And yet we hear yet again, even though through Christ's actions he's using his messengers to kind of draw attention. Okay, come on, let's listen, pay attention to what's going to happen.
That's right. As impressive or as even terrifying as the messengers are, and you see that throughout the New Testament or the Old Testament, right? Everyone when they see an angel seems to fear for their life, right? But it's never to draw attention to themselves, right? It's because it reminds me of Moses, right? When Moses comes down from the mountain, like why is he shining, right? Well, because he's been in the presence of God, and that's the point. Right, that when you see someone speaking like thunder, it's like, well, it's because he was standing in the presence of the one who, is the source of all the thunder, who created it, right? I mean, so it's just, as you were saying, directing us to, this is the person he's just speaking for. This is the person who he's been attending, right? Whose presence he's been standing in. So that's well said. So here we are. The Lamb is beginning to open these 7 seals, right? Like on this scroll or codex or whatever, probably scroll, as we were saying before. All right, so here we go. The first seal is opened, verse 2. And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." And out came another horse, bright red. All right, let's just pause right there. So we're getting in, if we skim down, right, we'll see that we're going to get 2 other horses yet. So we're beginning this sequence. We've got 2 horses right off the bat, and they're coming pretty rapid fire, right? That description of the white horse, I mean, that was just like a sentence, and then it was like, and here's the second horse all of a sudden, right? So this is why it's so dense, right? But this white horse, right? Okay, what are we to make of this? And I know that, like, I'm thinking about it because we just read Zechariah right before this, like maybe we read this part even like a month ago, but like we had white and red horses back there. So anyways, your thoughts, what are we to make of this?
So I think out of any of the 4 horses, I think the white horse is the one that probably has the most difficulty in trying to understand or see what is being meant. And like you said, it's 1 verse long. And I looked and behold, a white horse, and its rider had a bow, and the crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. So I think there's so many different interpretations that have come about just with the white horse.
Right.
That there are those who will claim that this is Christ. There are those who then will say that no, it's not Christ. It's more of a picture of the Antichrist. And then there's those that will fall under, well, no, it's a picture or a symbol for what happens within that context. So I struggle with this being the white horse and the rider being Christ for a couple reasons. The first being, as the horses come out, like you said, it's rapid fire. They're all out at once. It's not as if they fall in a line and there's one leading another. So you could suppose that they're all kind of on the equal playing field. They're all kind of coming out within a split second of each other.
Yep.
Which draws concern to me as, okay, yes, we see Christ as the one who does triumph, who is our King, who is clothed in the purity of his own righteousness. But then what follows doesn't fit into the picture of what Christ then brings. Also, the other one little piece, again, that often, Scripture is very purposeful, that in even the little details, things are revealed, is this understanding that the rider had a bow. There isn't times in which correct me if I'm wrong, in any place in Scripture in which Christ is ever depicted, or the Lamb, or the Son of God ever depicted with a bow. Often we see with a sword,
right?
Especially with the second coming, that he wields a sword. Is that enough to bank an entire argument on? I'm not sure. Dr. Lewis Brighton would say that this image is more of an encapsulation of what is happening within our earthly life. So every one of the horses depicts something that is happening to the world, to people, to God's people. And that point of view is that this image of one who is obviously in power, one who has the force of a bow, one who wears a crown, is one who comes to reign through any means necessary.
Right. Yeah. No. And I think I really appreciate your thoughts here. I mean, there's a lot here that we need to really kind of stop and make sure that we're tracking with. I mean, first of all, the last thing you just said, right? You used a present tense, a present progressive, right? Like this is the stuff that's like happening to God's people, right? And I think that's actually a really important point to be stopping and making here. It is really easy throughout Revelation to say like, oh, well, it's Revelation, it's apocalypse, right? Apocalypse means the end of the world, right? Well, we've already talked about that. No, it doesn't mean that. It means revelation. It means revealing, or it means unveiling, right? It's a spiritual perspective on what's going on now, or even what's happened in the past. So,
and with that, what may happen in the future.
Well, that's true. That's right. Because especially in that kind of Hebrew way of looking at it, that the future is not necessarily like something else. It's just kind of the part of the present that you don't see yet, almost, right? Mm-hmm. So the line's kind of fuzzy, but so it can go into the future, but by no means, right, because it's prophecy or because it's a vision, does that necessarily mean it's the future? So taking this as, what happened in the past, or what's going on right now is more than fair to look at as a possibility. To what you were saying then earlier about the identification of, okay, is this Christ or not? I would really agree with you that it's very hard to take this as symbolized for Christ. And I know that we talked about this in Zechariah, right? That it's very easy for us to look at the colors and the materials and to just kind of impose our own cultural sensibilities, right? Because, and we saw this back in Zechariah, right? Like, when there was like bronze, for example, we might say like, oh, bronze, like, it's like third best, right? Like it's gold, it would be better, right? Like,
sure.
No, I mean, that's our kind of, like when did we start giving out bronze medals for the Olympics? Like, not that long ago. When you look at, the history of things. So it's like, you can't just say like, oh, this is the white rider, right? This is like your knight, your hero riding on the white horse. Like that is our own, kind of like, Shrek 2 fairy tale sensibility, not necessarily what they're getting at from a Hebrew perspective, right? So you can't just go and jump that. And as you were saying, there's lots of arguments against it, including the fact that he has a bow when he's depicted, as you were mentioning in the first chapter, right? It's having a two-edged sword coming from his mouth. And elsewhere, there's a sword idea. And I think that your other point, too, about them all coming out in sequence, I mean, it really is putting all four of them on the same level. I mean, or, if anything, the last one seems to actually be the most prominent. So it really seems problematic. We've seen this again and again, whether it was like the four different groups of chariots in Zechariah, or whether it was the four beasts in Daniel, or whether it was the four sections of the statue in Daniel, right? They all are on equal terms. They're all meant to be, a succession of earthly powers or spiritual powers that are subservient to God, but not one of them representing God himself. So, I mean, like on the balance, very hard to identify this as Christ. I mean, in agreement with what Brighton says.
Yeah, and, I read in one commentator, they pointed out, just simply in Roman history, or even in history, period, is you often see those who are in rule, whether they be kings, whether they be dictators, whatever, that color white is often used as a sense of power. It's not, we see it, in the words of that flows from our baptism, that we are cleansed and made white again, but that color has also been used as a sense of power, of tyrannical rule, of I'm the guy, you're the people under me, follow me. It was a status, a hierarchy type symbol in color. It was a power, and that depicts also then the crown.
Right.
That there is rule over this world that sometimes comes by force, and will often put people into a sense of entrapment, being enslaved to something, being under somebody else's control.
Right. Yeah, I think that's well said. We forget. We sometimes think to ourselves like, well, hey, I thought royalty was like purple, or that kind of like indigo color, right? Well, I mean, sure, because that was rare, right? It was a very rare dye, very expensive to make, but it's also very hard and expensive to bleach things super, super white in the ancient world, right? I mean, it's really easy to kind of have something that sort of looks like some kind of beigey brown sort of thing, right? Or to even dye it red. That's pretty easy to do, even among common people. But to really go all out and make something just spotless white, I mean, you're talking about, you got to have resources to make something that clean. You think of like the Rolls Royce and like the guys working on it with the white gloves, right? I mean, like to have something look immaculately clean, that's money, that's power, right? And so just it complements everything you're saying, right? Whether it's a crown or whether it's a mounted horseman, that's not something that happened very often in the ancient world. I mean, that requires so much training to be able to train people to ride and then simultaneously be shooting, archers like mounted on horseback. I mean, you're talking about just lots of power, lots of resources. I do agree that it's a symbol of power, authority, and wealth. And I don't think you need to really get any more specific than that, than just that we see this, it happens again and again in this life, that those with lots of resources and with lots of power, they go and they assert themselves and they conquer. This is what happens present, past, and future all the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think with the purpose of how verse 2 ends, that he came to conquer, or came out conquering and to conquer, it was not to bring peace and redemption. No, it was to gain control. God did not come out to just run over people or mow people over with a lawnmower. No, whoever this is in verse 2 and on the white horse has a path of ruling and controlling mankind. The pretenses are not what
Right.
Christ came to as redeem.
Right. Well, yeah, and it is interesting to consider that you do have the word conquer there, and of course we have seen that actually applied several times to Christ and even to the church. Right back in chapter 5, the root of David has conquered. Back in the letters to the 7 churches, the one who, that was a language here, like he's called the one who conquers. I will grant to him to sit with me on my throne. So there's this language that we are conquerors, right, in this sense, right? But as you were pointing out, well, how is he conquering though, right? Is he conquering with his word and with his self-sacrifice, right, in the kingdom of heaven? No, he's conquering with mounted horsemen and material wealth and military power, right? So, that's how he's doing this. So I do think that everything here, it's actually fairly clear. And I think maybe later we can stop and consider, okay, do these colors have any coordination with what we read before in Zechariah? But we got to keep moving here because we only have read 2.5 verses. So back to the text here. Let's go ahead and take a look at these next 2. I think might be best to go ahead and take them together. So here's verse 3. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that people should slay one another. And he was given a great sword. When he opened the third seal, I heard the living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and wine." Okay. So we got 2 more horses here, and in case it seemed obvious what the second one represented, then we got a third one, and we got like denarii and measurements of wheat and barley here. So just when you thought that maybe it was easy,
maybe not so much.
Yeah, right. But so only like half a minute here. Just briefly, maybe summarize maybe what the second horse is about.
So I think that the second one is what follows in the rank of what comes with the white horse in terms of tyranny. It comes as a result of tyranny is bloodshed.
Right.
It is we know that people will die. People will begin to take one another's life. Death will begin to reign because peace doesn't exist under tyrannical rule. It just right. doesn't. Which moves then into the third horse. We're then under tyranny, under war and conflict. Then comes what begins to be the scarcity of goods, famine, yes. pestilence, people not having or being able to afford what is needed on a daily basis,
right.
Just to sustain basic life.
Yes, and hold that thought, because I want to talk more about this third one, but we got to go into our break here. But everybody, hang on. We're looking at Revelation chapter 6 here on Thy Strong Word, and we'll be right back.
These are the voices of young Lutherans in Mexico City, children who are excited to learn more about their Savior, Jesus. But they need our help because good Lutheran books for kids in the Spanish language are in short supply in Mexico. To learn how you can help tell Spanish-speaking kids everywhere about Jesus in a language they can understand, go to the Lutheran Heritage Foundation website at lhfmissions.org/Juan316.
Welcome back, everybody, to Thy Strong Word. I'm Pastor A.J. Espinosa. We're looking at Revelation chapter 6 today, and we're joined by our guest, Pastor Nate Ruback, pastor of Grace Lutheran Chapel in St. Louis, Missouri. We were just looking at these second and third riders, right? The horsemen of the apocalypse, right? Looking here at Revelation chapter 6, and we were saying how, there's so much to this. It's a visual, right? It's striking. It's something that stays with you thinking about it, right? This is one of the few places in actually the New Testament where you have the mention of color anywhere, right? Like, especially when you get to the last horse, like, I think it's like the only place I think where that color is like mentioned in the New Testament. Mm-hmm. But so it's colorful, it's striking, right? But what does it mean? And we were just talking about this. Well, when you look at it in context, it's actually a lot less just kind of like, oh, we'll never figure it out. It's open to interpretation than people think. It seems to actually be a little bit more straightforward. So let's go back to this. But I do want to make sure before I forget here, we are getting to look at these juicy chapters of Revelation thanks to the support of our producers, of course, but also our underwriters at the Lutheran Heritage Foundation. You can check out their website at lhfmissions.org. Thank you, Lutheran Heritage Foundation, for your support. We are looking here at these second and third riders. And brother, you were just saying how the second rider, it's kind of the one, if people were going to like guess, it's like, this is the one, okay, we can probably figure this out. Bright red. Okay. That's okay. Taking peace from the earth, given a great sword, people should slay one another. It sort of interprets itself, right? I mean, it's bloodshed, right? And of course, as you were saying, if you're going to assert worldly authority, right, how do you keep this tyrannical rule? Well, you have to kill people. This is what's happened again and again and again, right? Whether it's through just like the military or through the police state or whatever the case is, right? You don't maintain power unless it's through the sword, right? Like Paul says, he does not wield the sword without in vain, without meaning, right? So that's the one that's maybe the most straightforward. But then this is kind of an interesting turn. You were starting to introduce this, the third horseman, right? We got a black horse, and there's the idea you were saying of scarcity. So yeah, help unpack that just a little bit more with these like scales and this mention of like a denarius and all this.
Well, I think what happens, and you mentioned it, under tyrannical rule, it brings war. How do you control people? You control people by making them fearful of their life, by taking life. The flip side of that is then how are things overthrown? Well, they're overthrown by war and upheaval and revolt. But the other way that you begin to control people, that you are in control or that you rule over, is by making their daily necessities a little bit scarce. You make it difficult that they have to rely on the ruler, whether they want to or not. And I think that's what we begin to see with the third horse. Is it brings up imagery of just the daily things that are needed, that people would need or have to purchase to sustain the basic needs of life, begin to be so scarce that they're not affordable.
Right.
It talks about the denarius for a quart of wheat or 3 quarts of barley. It's important to understand that a denarius is a day's wage.
Right.
And I got thinking about that. If I had to take my day's wage to buy enough grain to have to put bread on my family's table,
right,
it's pretty desperate. And I think back into the days of the Great Depression, where things had gotten so expensive and so scarce that literally people were simply starving to death. It is
right,
interesting, and I struggled with this a little bit, where it talks then about do not harm the oil and wine, and I had to do a little bit of research into that, and a commentator had written that that often that part of the world, they relied on having to bring in grain. So grain was a commodity that was imported, and yet you have wine and you have oil, olive oil, that seems to be more readily available. So the understanding that there are some things that will be there, but the basic thing like grain to sustain your life is something that has become so scarce that it's either unattainable or people are just dying because they don't have it.
Right. Yeah, no, that's well said, and it's it is important to stop and to consider, what was ancient daily life like, and a lot of it was you had these staple crops, right? These staple grains like wheat and barley that you would just boil in a pot, right? And there you go, right? You can just eat that. You don't even have to process it and try to make bread out of it, though. I mean, you certainly could, because when you're eating that every single day, you try doing different things with it, right? It's like when I think back, just I mean, I don't know, like with my background in Mexican cuisine, it's like all the different arrangements of beans and tortillas, right? I mean, it's we got there's rice and beans and rice and beans in a tortilla, and just like all the different combinations of it, right? So
like potato,
yeah. So.
Potato. Yeah.
That's right. So there's those kind of just, basic things. Oil and wine, though, were counted among those basic things. I mean, it was actually in the Mediterranean world. I mean, this is why it's called the Mediterranean diet, right? Because every day you would have olive oil. I mean, kind of with everything. And same thing with wine. It wouldn't necessarily be your strong, fancy, vintage, in the bottle, right? But some kind of, pretty mild, not that strong a wine that's just there on the table, but a very common thing every day in that kind of ancient Mediterranean diet. So to your point, it's some things are there. We're going to get by, but man, it's going to be hard though when you got to spend your whole day's wage on just a quart of wheat. I mean, you think about it, your take-home pay for the whole day just gets you the quart of wheat, and that's it. I mean, you're not exactly, accumulating a nest egg or something. You are just barely getting by, and really, you're kind of having your resources drained overall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it puts in perspective the balance of what's happening between those who are ruling and those who are under control. You have those who, if they are in power, if they are the ones who are ruling, if they are the ones that can afford to keep their garments white, well, they're going to be the ones that can afford this stuff. So suddenly you have a balance between those who have and those who have not, those who don't have to measure and those who have to ration. I think it really gives us the image that this is a time of scarcity, not of overabundance. I think about the times of famine spoken about in the Old Testament, that you literally moved because that's where the food was.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just think of Ruth. I mean, that was the story, right? Right. Like there was no bread in the house of bread, and so they had to move.
Sure. Well, Joseph's brothers coming back to him because they had nothing.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Well, and I think that, and I like the word that you use, scarcity, though, because it doesn't actually say anywhere like famine, right? Which I think is perhaps significant, because you don't have to have like a famine or something for this condition to exist. I don't know. Even now, I kind of blush to even make the comparison, given how insanely wealthy we are when you consider the history of the world and even the current state of things. But just consider even recent history in the United States. People have described maybe the economy of like the last, say, like 10 years or so, right, as being really hard for a lot of people in a time when the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, right? Sure. Now, again, kind of that disclaimer said earlier in mind, right? There is this situation where even though the whole overall economy is, it's booming and the stock market's looking great, the lived reality of a lot of people is like, it seems like my paycheck is shrinking. Every day it goes less and less far, right? Like it buys less and less. Buying power is shrinking. And I don't think you got to read this Black Horse as some kind of dystopian literature, right? Like this is like a, Brave New World kind of thing or something like that, or 1984. I think this is just kind of actually, again, what naturally happens when you got people who are in power at the top. They're going to have policies that naturally are going to have themselves get richer and the poor are going to get poorer. That's what happens all the time. That's not some kind of weird, dystopian fantasy or something like that. And maybe the world to get that bad, like the Hunger Games. I mean, this is really just kind of the natural course of things all the time, I think. And so again, kind of seeing all of this these are just kind of the natural consequences of, what sinful men do when they try to seize power.
Yeah, I think maybe a better word to put this into perspective is an understanding or an image of inequity.
Yeah.
That there's not a balance between all, but there is an inequity or inequality to what is happening in the world.
Right.
And I think all of these things go to what we both said early on, is that this is not something that we look as future events. No, this stuff is happening now. Yep. The whole idea that what is being revealed in Revelation isn't a future event. No, it's happening here, and it has happened in the past. Ever more reason that we must be on guard and be ready to give, an account to what we believe, and to be ready with a witness and testimony of our faith. Not when we see Jesus come back. That's too late. It's in amongst all of this stuff now.
Yeah, no, that's well said. I mean, like all this stuff, right? And it's just, like so many of the things that, even the things that like the prophets were talking about, right? Like when they were having these great visions, they're very often talking about stuff that was going on, like right then and there. And I mean, and how often did the prophets? I mean, we saw this when we were looking at Isaiah, right, or Zechariah, right, or Haggai. How often do they talk about inequality and people who are cheating people and people who are using weighted scales, right, that were not fair, right? I mean, there's the scale, right? Inequality, inequity. I mean, injustice, right? Cheating people. I mean, that's the name of the game. There's going to be power is going to be maintained through violence, and it's going to be maintained through cheating people. Really just kind of the simplest way to put it. So, yeah, we see these things going on all the time, and there's always an opportunity then to be witnessing our faith and putting our faith into action, and to serve those who need us, our neighbors. Then we come to this last of the four horsemen, but it's not the last of the six seals we're looking at, because as you mentioned, we only have six in this chapter. We got to wait 2 chapters. The seventh seal doesn't happen until chapter 8. But okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the fourth seal and the fourth horseman here. All right, so here's verse 7. When he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. And they were given authority over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword and with famine and with pestilence and by wild beasts of the earth. Okay, so like I was suggesting a little bit, almost the most prominent in some ways. I mean, just in terms of, you have a very long description. I mean, it's at least as long as the description of the black horse. But I mean, just the terms that it's put in are really, I mean, they're just so striking, right? I mean, Death and Hades, we actually have a name, right? We didn't have a name for the riders in any other cases, but here, this one actually gets a name. And try to think of more prominent, scary sounding names than Death and Hades. So yeah, this fourth one just in some ways seems to top the other 3.
Well, I think it's not so much as it's topping as it may be a culmination of what's happening in the other 3. So through tyranny, through bloodshed, through inequity, now you have what comes to fruition is just simply death.
Right.
Dr. Brighton, and I found this very interesting reading part of his commentary. Instead of it saying, as we translate it, or as the ESV has it, as a pale horse, he describes it as a ghostly green horse. And to me, it's like that greenish colored fog, stuff that sits on the water that just has kind of a, have you ever been around a stagnant pond and it just has a reeking smell, and it's anything but beautiful. It is this picture of what this fourth horse looks like that simply, as it says, brings death. It brings the ultimate demise of what happens through what is happening in our life, of how we control, how we're under control, how we then lives are taken, how we take lives, and how inequity simply will just end up with death, whether it's through the sword, hunger, whatever it might be. It's kind of the culminating factor of all of it.
Right.
It's really not very common.
I like that way of putting it, a culmination, right? That in the end, what does all of this add up to, right? It adds up to death, right? And I think that's profound in a few ways, but I think of Paul, right, when he says, I think it was in Romans, right, where he says, so death reigned from Adam until Moses, right, even before the law was given, right. I mean, there's this sense in which the upshot, right, of just sin in this life is that really death is the one that's in control. Death is the one that's in power. Death reigns. And so, even though it takes all these different forms, right, whether it's, just, a tyrannical, force, hegemony, right? Or it's, bloodshed and war, or whether it's, this inequality, right? This cheating and fleecing of the poor, right? Whatever it is, it all adds up to really, it's just, this is the cycle and the power of death that's in control. And I gotta say, I do like the image, right, of that kind of maybe sickly green, right? That kind of just rotting, makes you sick to your stomach, kind of green, right? Because it is actually the case that when you look at the word in Greek, you have chloros, and that's the word that you get from chlorophyll, right? It's green, like the green in plants, right? So it could be something unnatural, not green horse the really pretty one that was taking Dorothy and her friends around the Emerald City, but not that kind of green horse, right? But it, perhaps something sickly. I do think that is it's certainly an intriguing possibility. It is interesting though, because the color though is, as much as it is related to other words that we've drawn from it. it can in Greek just kind of mean something like a grayish horse, right? And the one thing that's just appealing to me about that is if you have red, white, black, and gray horses, well, those are the same colors as the horses that we saw back in Zechariah. Right? When we were looking at, I think it was chapter 6, right? We had the chariot groups, and there was a chariot with black horses, one with white horses, one with red horses, and then one with we're looking at dappled horses. I mean, you had to look that up, right?
Sure.
But that grayishness that they get when they're transitioning, like say from like a black to a white or something like that. Mm-hmm. So it would be interesting if this is actually like the same assortment of colors, which we saw that back in Zechariah. Those colors seem to represent just the 4 different directions on the compass. That on a certain level, this is the stuff that happens everywhere. This is the stuff that's always going on in every place. Is there really a place on earth that isn't under the control of tyranny and violence and inequality and death? No, it's rampant to the 4 corners of the earth.
Well, and it's something that everybody on different levels and in different experiences in different parts of the world experience it in a different way. But if you look back, you think about, I mean, even in our lives, as blessed as we are, the country we live in, there, like you said, there are times in which we feel that we are oppressed by those who have been put in power, or that there is a need over what is able to be bought. And again, death has no... death is just an absolute, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't pick favorites. It's just a reality. So when you put it in the context, yes, that this stretches to every part of the earth, that includes everybody. Death is going to have an effect on every living being on our planet.
Right.
And you can't escape from it.
Well, so that said, one last question before we move on to the second half of the chapter here, because we do need to actually move on to the second half of the chapter, don't we?
Yeah.
So if this is the stuff that's going on everywhere, affecting everybody, why does it say, as of death in Hades, they were given authority over a fourth of the earth? What's that about?
Well, I think it's the fact that this is still ongoing. It's fourth of the earth. It's not complete. It doesn't say that it had the power was given to him over the entire earth as if it was already completed. Well, no, there's 3/4 of the remnant of the earth that still is affected. It has not come to completion, which I think is ever more evidence of the fact that these are times that are being spoken about now, not what has happened in the past, not as yet what to come, but it's in progression, but not yet complete.
Right. Well, yeah, and I think that's exactly the way I take it. That like this is stuff that's in motion, right? And what happened in Zechariah, right? Well, those 4 different teams, they went off in different directions, right? And I think that's kind of the idea that these are the things that are affecting everyone all the time, but everywhere, regardless of where they are, is kind of more obviously experiencing maybe one of them than the other, right? Like there's some parts of the world that like, yeah, the big thing going on there is like war, civil war, right? There's some parts of the earth that the big thing going on right now is, coronavirus,
Sure.
So black, death, or the pale one, right? Death, right? There's some parts of the world where, inequality is really like the thing that's on everyone's mind, right? And everyone's like, talking about revolution or something. So yeah, it's kind of like, these 4 riders get sent out over the earth, and maybe one rider is sort of more prominent in a given spot than another, but really they're kind of just circling all over the planet. This is the stuff that's always going on. And I think that the kind of then the scary thing is to consider, as they are going out in Zechariah, where are they going from? They're going from the temple we saw. And in fact, these are the 4 horsemen that are being given authority by ultimately God. And so what do we make of that?
Yeah, I think it comes down to permissive authority. Not that God is out with an evil finger that, is pointing and punishing directly for one's actions, but we do know that God permissively allows things to happen in order to accomplish his good. So I think it's that fine line of, is God causing these things?
Right.
To what does he permissively allow in order to accomplish, what is then revealed later on in Revelation, and what is often revealed, through the purposes of our life. And if we look at it from that perspective, I mean, as a pastor, you know very well that there are people that come into our office and with the questions of why God,
right.
Why did my child have to die? Why do I have cancer? Why is God punishing me? Well, are those actions direct punishments from God, or are they a way in which God is using,
right?
As
you're saying, allowing, permitting,
allowing. Yeah, it's
right,
allowing
right,
happening.
Right,
not
that's right.
It's a direct action.
That's helpful.
People to struggle with.
Yes. Well, no, that's right. And just because we can categorize it differently doesn't take away the difficulty and the pain of it, right? I mean, that's certainly what the book of Job's all about, right? Like, even when you explain it as thoroughly as you can, like, it's still hard, and there's just humility and in the face of it, and all we can really cry out is just, Lord, have mercy. But yes, that's a helpful distinction. And I think actually back in Zechariah 8, we had Pastor Worth kind of talking about that consequent versus antecedent will, if anyone wants to go back and look at the podcast. Only a couple of minutes left here. Let's read the second half of the chapter and just maybe kind of make a couple closing remarks here as we wrap up the chapter. So here's verse 9 then. Okay. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the witness they had borne. They cried out with a loud voice, "O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you will judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth?" Then they were each given a white robe and told to rest a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and their brothers should be complete, who were to be killed as they themselves had been. When he opened the sixth seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth, and the full moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth as the fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. The sky vanished like a scroll that is being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Then the kings of the earth and the great ones and the generals and the rich and the powerful and everyone, slave and free, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling to the mountains and rocks, "Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand?" All right. So, just the next two just kind of happen in rapid succession here. Only got maybe half a minute, literally, but just not enough time to really kind of look at this stuff in detail. It's fine. We looked at the Four Horsemen, which needed some attention, but just kind of overall zooming out here. Your thoughts on this, the wrath of the Lamb.
Well, I think what ultimately comes is you see those who have been who have been martyred, who have died in the Lord, who are then covered in His righteousness. And you begin to see the wrath and the kind of the cosmic powers that are spewed out as end times, as that final day of judgment comes. The beauty for us as believers is that day is not a day of judgment, but rather a day of redemption. And while those flee out of fear, there are those who are taken in the Lord, who simply are a day to rejoice. Verse 17, the great day of wrath has come. Who could stand? Simple answer is that no one can. But in Christ, what we see on that day of judgment is not the end. That there is, much like those who have been martyred before us, we too will be within the altar of the Lamb, clothed in His righteousness. That's
right. Yeah, right. Just like our baptismal, right? The white garments, so that we may stand without fear, right, on that day of judgment. Thank you so much, brother. Appreciate it. We looked at a really difficult chapter, but I think we made a lot of good sense out of it. God bless you, and looking forward to having you on again really soon.
God bless you too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, brother. Everybody, that was Pastor Nate Ruback, pastor at Grace Lutheran Chapel in St. Louis, Missouri. Moving on to Revelation chapter 7. We got to get on to that seventh seal, right? Until next time, everybody, I'm Pastor A.J. Espinosa. Peace.
You've been listening to Thy Strong Word, produced by the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod Office of National Mission in cooperation with Worldwide KFUO, the official broadcast ministry of the LCMS. Your support is vital for this program to continue. You can make a gift safe, secure, and easily online at kfuo.org. Thank you for listening and supporting Thy Strong Word.